Hello, everyone. Welcome. So happy you're here to join us for this third round held by the Watson Initiative's China Initiative that looks at key bilateral relationships in Chinese foreign policy. And of course, this fall, we're looking very closely at China-Japan relations. It seems to me it couldn't be more of an important issue today. Our hearts go out to people suffering in conflicts all over the world. It's been a terrible couple of weeks with now a second large war breaking out in the Middle East after the war in Ukraine. Of course, there have been wars going on in Africa, and let's not forget in Asia too. We can think of the conflict in Myanmar. What we're trying to do is prevent the outbreak of what could be an even more devastating conflict in East Asia. And this discussion is part of that effort. We'll be doing 3 lectures this fall. On October 31st, we'll have Gui Yongtao from Beijing. And on November 10th, we'll host Mike Mochizuki from George Washington University here at Brown. So you're welcome to join for those. But I'm thrilled today to introduce our speaker who is in Tokyo, Ms. Sayo Saruta. She is an attorney at law. She is president of the New Diplomacy Initiative and actively works on diplomatic and political issues based in Japan and also in Washington, D.C., particularly to bring Japan's various voices on these issues into the fields of diplomacy between Japan, the U.S., and other East Asian countries. The area of her specialty is on diplomatic issues, including in particular the U.S. Japan security system, U.S. military bases in Japan, as well as Japanese policy towards East Asia. She's given advice to Japan's top leaders, including parliamentary members, and also members of Japan's local governments. Her frequent articles appear in newspapers and magazines like Asahi. Previously, she worked with Amnesty International and also at Human Rights Watch. She holds a LLM from Columbia University Law School and also a master's in international relations from American University in Washington, D.C. I also want to say that I was very pleased to meet Sayo at Princeton in 2018, when she brought none other than a former prime minister, a quite remarkable figure in Japanese politics, Yukio Hatayama, to visit and give a lecture at Princeton. Anyway, I'm thrilled to welcome my friend Sayo to the podium here, and looking forward to her thoughts on this critical issue of China-Japan relations and how they might figure into this new world order. Go ahead, Sayo. She has some slides to share with us. I think she'll put them up.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much for the great introduction, as well as I'm very honored to be with you today. So this is a great opportunity for me to have a chance to talk to American audience about my thought on the current very complicated and difficult situation in Asia. The topic I will talk from now is Japan's options in an era of U.S.-China competition. I'm thinking that there might be some people who are not very familiar with the Japanese security policy. So at the very beginning of my talk, I would like to mention what the Japan's traditional security policy since World War II. So we have experienced the tragic war during Second World War, including atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Based on the very severe, tragic experience of the war, we adopted the peace constitution with Article 9. The Article 9 says the Japanese people forever renounce the war, as well as, as well as sovereign rights of the nation and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. So you might not believe me, but 75% of Japanese people support the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. So our traditional security policy, actually it is until today, but the government of Japan says we take an exclusively defense-oriented policy. But we have lots of crossing points around us in East Asia. We call it like maybe 4 crossing points. One is Korean Peninsula. Second one is East China Sea. You may say Senkaku and Daewoo Islands. And Taiwan Strait might have something very soon. And South China Sea is another crossing point. Then we sometimes say, if only Japan, these are the conflicts not between Japan and other countries, but maybe between Taiwan and China, or North Korea and South Korea. Senkaku Islands issue, East China's issue is our issue between us and China, but that is not something which could start the war like Ukraine. It's such a small island. So if only Japan, is there any possibility that we would be involved in the war like Ukraine? But now we have lots of, the system to contain China, like, FOIP and Quad and AUKUS and Japan, Korea, US, which had started, in this summer. So region seems to be divided into 2 blocks. Tension gets higher and higher. So that is our situation right now in Japan and in East Asia. So under the US-China competition, which could trigger the war in Taiwan and China, most likely Japan's policy has been changing. The government of Japan decided to strengthen Japanese defense power, including we can have counter-strike capability. And so we've decided to double the defense budget to 2% of GDP. We have decided to intensify Japanese self-defense force in the Southwest Islands, called especially in Okinawa. The Japanese government policy is focusing on the Taiwan Strait War. So in this summer, in August, Vice Prime Minister also said in Taiwan, actually he said this in Taiwan to show, our solidarity with Taiwan, that Japan must show will to fight to deter China. That is the voice of Japan now. Then there are summits between Japan and the United States, as well as 2+2 in January this year, then declare that we will modernize the alliance. It means deepening Japan-US military integration. Then we will have more joint military exercises, which is already very much conducted. And also, we've decided to use let the military of Japan and the United States to use civilian ports and airports in Japan. Then the US bases in Japan is getting more important and important, according to the people in the United States. This first sentence is quoted from the policy recommendation of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, US House of Representatives. There are 10 recommendations, and out of 10, the number 9 was about us. US bases in the theater means East Asia, around Taiwan, should be strengthened against the possibility of POA attack. Also, another quote is from CSIS report. The title is The First Battle of the Next War, Wargaming a Chinese Invasion of Taiwan. So ability to operate from US bases in Japan is so critical to the US success. You might not know how many bases we have in Japan, but you see the map, then now you understand, we have lots of US bases in Japan, US military bases in Japan. Then the famous one is in Okinawa. Okinawa is located at the very south of Japan, at the end of Japan's archipelago. That is one of the Japan's prefectures. Out of 47 prefectures, we have Okinawa prefecture. Then the Okinawa prefecture has 31 U.S. military exclusive use facilities, and the U.S. base occupies almost 15% of Okinawa main island. The landmass is up to almost 50% of Okinawa main island. Then, today's topic is not about Okinawa-based issues, but I would like to mention a little bit about the Okinawa situation right now in terms of U.S. bases. So U.S. bases have lots of issues with Okinawan people's lives. So there are so many criminal cases as well as aircraft accidents. And also recently, the PFAS issue, that is very famous. PFAS is a chemical which is from the extinguishers, which United States military use in the bases in Okinawa, Japan, everywhere in the world, but especially in Japan, that is very infamous right now. So that chemical contaminated water and soil of Okinawa a lot. In addition to the situation, new base is under construction at Henoko, Okinawa. So Okinawa people has been suffering from the very huge presence of US bases in Okinawa, and now suffering from the construction of new base there. So by far majority of Okinawans are against the new base construction, but now it is under construction. So now you see the photo of the area of construction that is before the construction, but now the situation is like this. So that was the place rich in nature with coral reefs and as well as sea mammals and tropical fish. But now the situation is like this. So now, not only about the crimes and aircraft accidents, but also the other location is very close to Taiwan. People of Okinawa are very much concerned about the Taiwan war possibility, which is now talked by lots of American and Japanese, Taiwanese, maybe Chinese experts and the government. At the time of the war, the base in Okinawa will be targeted or not. That is a public opinion poll conducted in Okinawa. Including agree and some part agree, by far majority of Okinawans are very concerned. They feel like, we would be targeted because we have lots of US bases in their land. I think that is more than 80%. Yeah, more than 80% of Okinawan people are concerned to become a victim of the Taiwan Strait War. I mentioned about Okinawa now, but not only about Okinawan, people, but also the Japanese people also afraid of the happening of the Taiwan Strait War. So 80% of Japanese are concerned about being involved in a Taiwan contingency, according to the public poll conducted in Japan nationwide. And 70% want to deepen relations with China through diplomacy and economics rather than just by strengthening defense capabilities. That is, of course, because there is a possibility of huge casualties in Japan at Taiwan War. And then recently, we have to conduct the evacuation exercises, like the photo you now see in front of you. Then there is a discussion that we have to have shelters against the missiles. So this is the voice of Japan, and which is very different from the voice of the Japanese government. The Vice Prime Minister of Japan also said we have to show the will to fight against China. But if we made the statement in Taiwan, but people of Japan is not ready to have the war at all. Sorry to have some Chinese characters in Japanese in front of you, but you can see the very small translation under the Japanese. But that is very different from the Japanese government voice. This question is to the public poll is Japan's involvement in the event of military attack by China on Taiwan. surprisingly, self-defense, the first question is, are you agree with sending Japanese self-defense force to Taiwan Strait alongside US forces at the time of Taiwan's war? Then only a little more than 20% said agree, including some that agree. Then, more than 70% of people said disagree. We cannot send troops of Japan to Taiwan Strait war. That is exactly contradicted to the saying from the Japanese government. Not only about the self-defense force, but also we have lots of US bases, as I said. But, the question 4, there should be no Japanese involvement in military affairs, including the use of US bases in Japan. Not only self-defense force, but also to let the United States to use the bases in Japan is something we cannot accept. That is at least half of the Japanese people's voice. When I show this graph to the lots of experts in Washington D.C. as well as staffers and congressmen in Washington D.C., they were so surprised, and some of them commented to me that why the Japanese government doesn't hear the voice of the Japanese people. That was their question to me. That is my question to them, to the government of Japan as well. So, of course, it is not very easy to have diplomacy with China, but, in order to reduce the tension, mitigate the tension between, not only between Japan and China, but also between China and other countries in the region, including the United States, I have to say, is, we have to take more diplomacy more. So simply expanding military power will only increase tensions and even will not make deterrence work. I strongly believe deterrence by military is very important, but just simply expanding military power doesn't work well, even for deterrence. So in order to make deterrence work, we have to have reassurance. Reassurance is a word that's a terminology to have, assurance each other between two countries which might have conflict. This word is very often used right now, also in the American experts' pieces and articles. So the assurance is very important to deterrence to leave room for the other side, that is to leave room for the other side to think that its core interests will not be threatened without using military force. In this case of Taiwan Strait War with China, reassurance means, one China policy to give them, understand we Japanese, we the United States understand what the meaning of one China policy. When we started the diplomatic relationship with China in 70s, we said that, China, we understand that you are taking the one China policy. One China policy means Taiwan is a part of China. That is the stance of Chinese government that, we understand. So we say, when you see the history of China and Taiwan for this 60 years, China says that's a part of China. The Taiwan people said, I would like to make independence, but I understand Chinese government would be very much upset, if we decide to make independence, if we declare the independence. So that's a situation, and that hasn't changed for 60 years. But now, recently, the Japanese, vice prime minister visited Taiwan, then saying that we have to show the will to, fight against China. Then American government, not the government itself, that's a policy of ambiguity, but some, very big figure said, we have to, have the embassy of Taiwan in the United States, in Washington, D.C., or, the status in the United Nations of Taiwan have to be changed into the one similar to, or same as other one sovereign country. Like this saying, or the, visit by House Speaker Nancy Pelosi policy to Taiwan also changed the feeling of China very much. And now, United States is helping Taiwan very much to the level which we cannot accept. So these things could change the situation a lot. So we have to go back to the time, to the same, statement Japan and the United States made when we restart the diplomatic relationship with China. That is one China policy. Then when I say that to the talk, I give a lot of talk in Japan almost every day, not every day, but I would say like 3 days, I give a talk to the people in Japan in a university or the press conference, lots of press in Japan. Then people ask me, what do you think about the feeling of Taiwan people? Yes, please see the public poll in Taiwan. Only 7% of Taiwanese want to independence now. Only 7%. So that's a voice of Taiwanese. Don't exaggerate, the Taiwanese voice for independence. That is I guess, Taiwanese understand more than us, more than Japanese, more than Americans, what would happen if they declare independence. So, if you would like to support Taiwanese voice, that means we shouldn't say like the independence now, or we should help Taiwanese independence. So their current opinion is to stick with one China policy. And it means, status quo, just maintain status quo. That's their policy. So, having said that, of course, we have to have, good relationship with Taiwan as well. Of course, we have to, get along with Taiwan for a long time. And, from now, we have to deepen the relationship with Taiwan as well. Also, we have to have better diplomatic relationship with China more. That is also a substantial thing. More substantial and institutionalized diplomatic channels with wider range of themes and quality for dialogue at all levels between Japanese government and Chinese government, from prime minister to the bottom of the government, as well as, the expert like us. We should have, better relationships with China. To have more like a workshop or a symposium like this, or just simple conversation with them, exchange emails, whatever possible way to communicate with them is very, very important. Then when it comes to the government, point is it have to be institutionalized, not only just once it happens and then that's over. No, not like that. We have to have institutionalized diplomatic channels between Japan and China. In my case, but in your case, please try to have much deeper relationship with China. I think the government of, the Biden administration, the government of the United States right now is trying to have much deeper diplomatic relationships since I would say, I would say the beginning of this year. So that direction is, going to be, better way. I'm a little bit worried about the election next year because, in the politics here in Japan as well as in the United States, next year you have an election, when you have an election, the government or politicians would like to show how strong we are, namely how tough we are on something, in this case, China. So that could change the field, the momentum, I guess. So I hope even next year, the government of the United States could keep the stance to put importance on diplomacy, more on just, having a much stronger military power. So, I think there are some good models around us, especially I would like to mention about the Southeast Asian countries. So their stances are very different from the one 5 years ago, I would say. Their stances now clearly don't make us choose. Don't make us choose the sides from China side or the United States side. So ASEAN Outlook on Indo-Pacific, that is a policy paper made by the ASEAN countries, as ASEAN, one group of 10 countries. They declared that, we cannot take sides. We cannot take side. So Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong put one article in Foreign Affairs magazine saying that don't make us choose. The United States is a very important country to us, but China is also very important, especially economically. It's very important. So we cannot choose side. But if we have to choose side, if we are forced to choose side, any answer to choose any side is miserable, tragic. So we cannot choose side. So, I was very surprised to hear that Indonesian government, Malaysian government showed concern when Quad was established 2 years ago. Now you see the graph in front of you showing that how, much ASEAN people are afraid to be forced to choose side. Only 6% of ASEAN experts. That is not a poll to people on the street. That is a poll only to the experts and government officials. So ASEAN has to choose between one of the two major powers, means China and the United States, as remaining neutral is just impractical. That is only 6%. Others said, we cannot choose side. So, my organization is trying to promote the voice, of the people, diversity of the voices of Japan. As I explained, the voice of Japan and voice of the government of Japan is very, very different on some topics, on some theme. So since it was established 10 years ago, we would like to promote the voice of Japan, which, sometimes even majority in the Japanese society, to be hard and to be listened in the United States and or in China or in other countries as well. So we do lots of activities, try to bring the Okinawan voices to the American audience, making some report and also, visiting a lot with high rank officials or high rank parliamentary members to the United States. Also, recently, we made a lot of effort to make letters with not only with Japanese congressman, but also with American congressman. It's a joint letter between two Congress, calling on something which usually the Japanese government and the United States government doesn't say. So in this case of the letter which I show is we are calling, that is not me, but the Japanese and the United States congressman calling on no first use of the nuclear weapons. That is my just a small effort to try to change the diplomatic situations. Yes, now, I'm concluding, by explaining what I'm doing, then what I taught, but, I'm very much open to the questions. I think that this is not very typical voice of the Japan, and it's not the voice which you can hear when you attend the symposium in Washington, D.C., but that voice exists in Japan. Actually, sometimes in this case, majority of Japanese people's voice helps is, my opinion now I talked. So I'm very happy if you could make some question to me. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sayo, thank you so much. Let me start by complimenting you on a very fine presentation, very clear and very persuasive. I must say, as somebody who studies foreign languages, that your command of English is really very stunning, and you're very eloquent in English. So thank you again for really helping to bring in some Japanese viewpoints that we often don't see. And so I regard your remarks as quite a revelation, and a lot of this material is so interesting. Well, let me start by welcoming people who are following online at our webinar to begin to write questions into the Q&A. I have many questions, so let me go ahead and start, but as I see questions popping up, I will try to field those as well. So let me start by, again, there's so many areas to cover, so we'll try to get around to many questions, but I feel moved to begin with Okinawa, as I know you are so familiar with that situation. And I think it is appropriate because it's really, you could say it's kind of the center point of where U.S., Japan, and unfortunately maybe China meet, and it's right in the, if you will, in the crosshair. So could you explain a little more the present situation there? I understand the governor has recently, been very public with his criticism. I mean, my question as an American would be, well, for one, I wonder why it is in our country, in the United States, we hear so little about the protests and the Japanese discomfort with the base. But how is it that if so many locals in Okinawa oppose the base effort, why does it still go forward? As you showed in your pictures, that they continue to build the base. This is not a cheap effort. This is billions of dollars, I think. So why does this all move forward even despite opposition?
First of all, Okinawa is just, one of 47 prefectures in Japan. So even though, almost everybody in Okinawa is opposing the new base construction, that is only very, very small voice compared to the very big voice from Japan. I mean, Tokyo, I can say Japan, Okinawa was one of the separated kingdom for a long time until like 200 years ago. But then, the voice of Okinawan people is not very well, listened by the Japanese government as well as the United States government at all. It is, when it comes to the United States, the Japanese government doesn't want to bring their voices to Washington D.C. at all. So, media doesn't cover, very much, and also I think the diplomats in Washington D.C. doesn't talk anything about the Okinawan people's opposition position to the American counterpart at all. So when I lived in Washington D.C., it was very, very hard to find anybody who understands the situation of Okinawa. So the question, it's very, very
that's really upsetting. I think I'm very embarrassed by that, honestly.
Yeah. So, that you said China and the United States and Japan will meet each other in Okinawa. It means that war might happen in Okinawa, I would say. So the people's feeling in Okinawa is now a little bit shifting only, to oppose new base construction, but to oppose the war, happening in that region. If something happened in Taiwan Strait, the bases which the United States would like to use is, of course, the bases in Okinawa. From where the United States will send troops to Taiwan, that is from Okinawa. Obviously, it's so close to Taiwan Strait. It means they would be retaliated. The retaliation would, happen not only on the U.S. bases in US-based, place, but also, of the neighboring area as well. So they are really opposing the Japanese government policy right now, not only about the base issue as well, but also about Taiwan and the diplomatic situation between China and Japan.
I see. And a follow-up there is I understand that there's also a lot of building fortifications in the along the Ryukyu chain, Ishigaki, all these small islands to the south, even closer to Taiwan. Is there a kind of similar dynamic there? How did the locals on Miyako, Ishigaki, these islands, are they part of the debate too?
Yes, when it comes to the Taiwan Strait War, these are even the main people who are, trying to say, yeah, please stop having the war, please stop having the war. Because recently lots of infrastructure is under, constructed, and also missile is about to be introduced into the region by mainly by Japanese self-defense force, but also United States and Japanese military is now are conducting lots of joint military exercises there as well. So, new bases are built in Miyako Islands as well as Ishigaki Islands. Then these are the area very well known for its very beautiful ocean for sightseeing. So lots of people want to visit to Miyako Ishigaki Island, which is very close to Taiwan, for their holiday vacation. But now we have to see missiles next to the coast as well. So they are saying that we would lose the way to make money, as well as we have to have a lots of we have to be a target by China if we have lots of missiles there. So of course their population is 100,000, and then they are opposing the current situation. So even very conservative mayor or even very conservative I would say city assembly members are saying that it's okay to have, say like a self-defense force here, but to have the missiles to attack other countries, which is allowed to have by the Japanese government at the end of last year, we don't want to have that kind of missiles at all in this island at all. So.
All right, that's fascinating. I myself would like to get to Miyako, and I need to get to Okinawa as well. It's on my list. Let me turn to a question from, well, you guessed it, Mike Mochizuki, who is one of the foremost experts and will be in our series too. So here's a question from Professor Mochizuki. I'll read it slowly, make sure you can understand it. It's about Japan's approach to the One China policy. He says, thank you for your excellent analysis of Japanese public opinion regarding Taiwan. I have a question about Japan's One China policy. Interestingly, the Japanese government does not talk about a One China policy, but only refers to the 1972 Japan-China normalization communique. Former Foreign Minister Okada advised Prime Minister Kishida in the National Diet that Japan should follow the U.S., which stated in writing in its national security strategy that the U.S. does not support the independence of Taiwan. But Kishida ducked the question and only repeated a reference to the 1972 communique. In a recent Quincy webinar, that's the Quincy Institute, a former deputy foreign minister, Hitoshi Tanaka, stated that it would be political suicide to state publicly that Japan does not support the independence of Taiwan. And Professor Mochizuki then says, why is that? So I don't know if you could you get that question? Do you understand?
I understand the question very well, perfectly. But I don't have the 100% sure answer to the question.
Yeah, it's a hard one.
Yeah. But
we'll turn that back around and ask Mike Mochizuki when he arrives. But go ahead.
I guess, One China policy sounds like something which they cannot accept for the, I would say, conservative LDP members. LDP is our ruling party, by far majority in the Diet. So some are very reasonable, but some are very, very hawkish. So the hawkish member of LDP cannot accept the idea of One China policy. That's maybe why the Prime Minister Kishida or other government officials cannot say we still have One China policy. Officially, the government of Japan still maintain the policy. It is, but to repeat it. That's what I want Japanese government to do. But if you repeat that right now, that they would say like it is against the independence of Taiwan. Now our position is to support Taiwan's independence. So I guess within a huge party, LDP, there are some people who are very, very conservative. They would say no, that is not the right time to say One China policy. That may be why. That is my guess, but maybe right.
Oh, that's fascinating, Sayo. Thank you. I feel like in some ways it does mirror the situation in the United States exactly, where on the books our policy is the One China policy, and yet fewer and fewer politicians are willing to explore what that means and to go on the record supporting it. Let me broaden the discussion a little bit, if you don't mind, but can we talk a little bit about in general, Japanese perceptions of China? What's the mood both among elites and the public? Your data that you shared with us is fascinating and important. And I think it's very important that Japanese really want to avoid a war and want to increase, contacts. But on the other hand, there does seem to be a shift in perception. More darker views of China are more common now in Japan, I think. But can you help us understand the mood in both among the elite, but also the public?
In general, I also know the atmosphere of the United States, and I think the United States people are really afraid of, China very much. Then I would say, not many people like China very, very much. Then, some people I would say like dislike China. The feeling is similar to Japan. So you could imagine how Japanese situation is when I say it's similar to the United States. But the difference is, basically, I have to say that, Japanese people don't like China that much. I would say like 80% of Japanese people really, I don't know the exact number of the public polls, but Japanese people really, concerned on China. They're afraid of China. But the difference is, we use same, language, not same language itself, but we have lots of, cultures similar to China. We imported lots of, when I see the 2000, years history, we imported lots of cultures from China. And in our country, we have lots of Chinese people who live here who already became Japanese, but, originally, they're from China. And also, even if I don't mention about culture and history, we have lots of goods and, products from China. 1/4 of our trade is with China. So generally speaking, the government, in this case, LDP, the Conservative Party, is supported by the business sectors. But the business sector have to rely on China very much economically. It is contradicted. So when the United States said we have to decoupling, with China, or we have to now de-risking with China, we pretended that we are following that decision by the United States. But can we do that? Now we realize that it is extremely difficult to cut the tie, even partially, with China. So there is another public poll which I know well which is very important, the relationship with the United States or relationship with China. The largest, answer from the public poll is almost half says both are equally very important. Both, are equally important. It's almost half, like almost 50%. So you could tell, but as feeling, I don't think I like China very much, but the reality is I very much understand that China is very important country to us. That's why we have to use diplomacy to mitigate the tension between us and China. That's a feeling.
Yes, I think so. And I also wonder how much is a result of the pandemic, meaning like where a lot of the exchanges broke down, less tourism and so forth, that it's, that we need to build more people-to-people contacts again. I know for a fact that, it's well known in China that many Chinese like to visit Japan for vacation, to see the sights and the fresh air and enjoy Japanese culture. So as you pointed out, the cultures are somewhat close. Can I broach a difficult issue, a painful issue, I think, for many people. Of course, it's the history issue in China-Japan relations. And I know since you focus a lot on Okinawa, that you know a lot about history and that terrible history of how Okinawa suffered in the war. But how do you think about the history issue in China-Japan relations? Is it something the two countries can, work through, make progress?
I would say until like 10 years ago, China sometimes claimed that, Japan should apologize more than Japan didn't solve the history issue of the wartime very well compared to, say, like Germany and Europe. Then we have that kind of problem with China and maybe Korea more. So we have lots of issues of history. But recently, there are so many issues between us and China. So Korea mentions it a lot until recently, but until like the current administration, now the Korean administration is something conservative. That's why, they don't mention that much to us. But, China is mentioning that sometimes, but not to the level of Korea does. It is maybe because China is more powerful than Japan, and they made some comments sometimes when say like a prime minister visit Yasukuni or prime minister or ministers visit Yasukuni shrine, which is a shrine to, I would say, have the lots of war criminals how to say celebrated. So but not that much between China and Japan. But the things I want to mention to you now is about this issue is if we Japanese could have solved the history issue much earlier, like 30 years ago or 50 years ago, we could have a better friends in Asia. We don't have a lot of great friends in Asia. Unfortunately, we always think that Japan have developed much earlier than other Asian countries. Then we are only one country which can send a representative to G7. Like we are part of the Western society. We are really proud of the part of white people's society. That kind of mindset still exists in Japan. So Japan, China, Korea, these countries which we invaded long time, 80 years ago, it's somehow inferior to us. That kind of feeling still exists in the especially conservative Japanese people. So that cannot solve the current issue at all, right? If you feel like they are friends, we solve the issue together. So now is the time we can work together. Things have to be solved like that. But we don't have that kind of feeling. Be friends, That is the problem, But history between China and Japan is not something very big now, I guess.
Yeah. It does make me wonder if maybe the best approach is when it's not a big issue. That can be a time to quietly make progress. That could, as you say, build a more fundamental kind of friendship. So I wonder if that could be helpful, actually, even now. But let me ask a related question, if you don't mind. And this is, you mentioned Korea several times. And I know history has been a big issue in Japan-Korea relations, of course. But from the Chinese perspective, the big question is they are concerned about the warming relationship now between Tokyo and Seoul and Washington, of course, the Camp David summit. Could you comment on that? And what are your thoughts? Does this change the dynamic with China?
Yes, I think so. In August, Trilateral Summit was held in the United States Camp David, Korea, United States, and Japan. Then that was announced in Japan. That was broadcasted widely in Japan. That that summit was historical. That was very meaningful or substantial change of the especially relationship between Japan and Korea, because we had had a lot of conflicts between two countries. But now, thanks to the United States, I would say pressure, we changed the situation a lot, and also Korea administration has changed as well. So only historical moment now we are enjoying. That's Japanese news media's coverage. But 1 month after, everybody came to know that North Korean leader went to Russia, then had a summit with President Putin, then discussed about something related to military and security, right? Which we have been very much afraid of for a long time. Then now Russian defense secretary proposed to North Korea and China to have joint military exercises with 3 countries. I don't know China will take this proposal. Maybe China is more cautious about the trilateral cooperation, among the 3 countries. But, if we decide, strengthen our relationship together, it's easy to imagine that the other side will strengthen their military relationships as well. now we have lots, as I talked to you, Quad and FOIP and, what else, like AUKUS, which Japan is not a member of, but still the international frame to data China. So how many deterrents do we need to win over them? So it's okay to deter them, but in order to, have, in order to have better relationship or to mitigate the tension or to reduce the possibility to have the real war happening, we have to have diplomacy when we deter something. We now have a time a little bit. So enjoying this time by, mitigate the tension. We have to have diplomacy. That is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, that's great. And I just before I came on, I heard a good rumor that perhaps Prime Minister Kishida and President Xi will meet in November. I'm hoping very much that that is true. Let me ask you a question about Taiwan, and I'm glad we have focused on it. It really does merit this kind of attention. So your presentation really spoke very, made some very powerful points along those lines. But I'm moved to ask you, as a citizen of Japan, as an expert, if war does occur in the Taiwan Strait, what do you think Japan will really do? It strikes me that not only is Japan's opinion kind of uncertain at best, but that the government of Tokyo doesn't have really much experience with this type of situation. And moreover, I hate to say it, but I study China's military. I imagine they will make some threats against Japan. Say, if you dare to intervene in our affairs, we will, that China would strike out against Japan. So so I think it was Hugh White who said you have to imagine a tragedy to prevent it. How do you imagine this situation? What would happen? What would Tokyo do?
Yes, as I showed the public poll, 75% of the Japanese people are against sending Japanese self-defense force to Taiwan Strait War. So the number is huge. Then we still, until maybe 10 years later, still we have lots of people who have experience of the war. They are now, kind of dying, but still we have these, generations. So our kind of pacifist standpoint hasn't been exterminated at all. So still many people would say, listen, the Japanese government, you are the government over us. We chose you. So that's why we have to stop the war. So still now the Japanese government is trying to show very, tough position to other countries, including to China, including to Taiwan. But if something happened right now, I think the Japanese people's voice would stop Japan to send self-defense force to Taiwan because they are really afraid of retaliation. But time matters a lot. At the end of last year, the government of Japan adopted the 3 documents, security documents. Then in the document, one thing was said, written. So the government of Japan have to do the good education to the Japanese public that the people would understand the meaning of security and try to be ready to support the military more. That kind of things is included in the documents. So from now, I still already feel a lot, but we have to have a lot of evacuation training in my city in Tokyo as well. So if we have to have that kind of experience, evacuation, having shelter in your garden, not many people have garden, shelter at all. But, if the government started saying we have to do the evacuation training at the elementary school, the atmosphere of the society will change a lot, right? So that is a way to control the people's mindset not by the Japanese government. So that I said, time matters means if now still many people say, I have an experience of the war, we cannot do the war. So, the best way to support Taiwan is we call on the, diplomacy, the ceasefire, that voice could come out from the Japanese public a lot. But I don't know about the 10 years later or 20 years later.
Yes, it does make me think that Japan maybe could play a extremely important role, sort of surging diplomacy, to try to find a creative way forward in order to make sure a war doesn't break out. Japan has so much at stake. We just have a couple more minutes left, so I want to get through a few more questions. So I know there's been a lot of discussion about, unfortunately, about nuclear weapons, especially related to the Korean situation. But I wanted to ask you, because Americans are talking more and more about this, about the possibility of Japan maybe considering developing nuclear weapons. What's your thinking on this? I mean, is Japan still very strongly anti-nuclear? And what do you think the prospects for that are? Like, for instance, what if South Korea, for example, develops a nuclear weapon? What will Japan do? That's a hard question, but
yeah, if South Korea started to having the nuclear weapons, Japanese government as well as people might want to have a nuclear weapon of ourselves, I guess. But generally speaking, when it comes to the nuclear weapons, our anti-nuclear weapons mindset is still very strong, I would say. As I showed you, the public poll opinion, 75% of the Japanese people are supporting the nuclear ban treaty. 75, that is a huge number.
Yeah.
But the Japanese government doesn't ratify the ban treaty at all. So that's another difference between the voice of Japan and the voice of the people. But generally speaking, still the voice of Japan, I think on the foundation of Hiroshima Nagasaki experience, is still very strong. But Prime Minister Abe, before he was assassinated, said we should have the nuclear sharing with the United States. That was a little bit accepted by a certain number of, I would say, parliamentary members. Not everybody, but a few, but some. I would say a few. At a time,
wow.
At least two discussions should be started, kind of idea. This discussion should be started to think if we should have it or if we shouldn't have it. But still, the Prime Minister Kishida, right after Prime Minister Abe, former Prime Minister Abe said, right after that, Prime Minister Kishida said, yeah, we don't think about it. We shouldn't, start thinking about it. So that's it. This is the end of the discussion. So nowadays, not so many people, talk about nuclear sharing at all. So if nothing happens around us, I think this public opinion, including high-rank officials of the government, will continue. But like you said, if Korean government decide to have it, I don't know what would happen. Maybe more start thinking about, we should also develop nuclear weapons in our country as well. But I don't think if we decide to have it in Japan, United States government wouldn't be very happy to hear that, because we don't need any more nuclear umbrella. So
yes, I think it would make everybody nervous. I think that's for sure. Well, we're near to our close. Let me ask you one final question, but this has two parts, and these are very obvious questions, but I think we want to hear your thoughts. For one, do you have you gave some suggestions to improve relations between Japan and China. Do you want to review those again or add any ideas? It seems to me we need to work very hard on this, and you have my support in any way that I can. Also, are there ways that we can fix the U.S. Japan alliance, make it more flexible, make it more work better for Japanese, make it work for Okinawa? How can we how can we make our alliance more palatable?
Thank you very much for great question. I am working that, in order to make it happen. I live in the United States. I have lots of friends who are Americans, and I love American cultures and people very much. I respect lots of points of the United States. But if there is something, we think it's not the interest of Japanese people, the government of Japan should, say it's something we cannot accept. Please change it. The government of Japan said something even against the United States government. If the government of Japan think it's not the right thing to do. So I'm the reason why I showed the public opinion poll of Southeast Asian country is, such a small country like Singapore, or not very small nowadays, but Indonesia, Malaysia showed opposition position to the United States. When they say they think it's not the right thing to do, that is surprising. Japanese government is considered to be said in Japan. I don't know what the American people think, but the Japanese government always think Japan is the best ally of the United States in Asia. So we have to follow the decision made by the United States. And also, if we say something against the United States will stop defending us if something happening on Japan. But we have lots of U.S. bases, and U.S. bases is not used only to defend us. Of course, we thank to the United States that they are helping us a lot, and I really, have to say thank you very much for that. But still, the base is not only for that, but also for the American, universal strategy as well, including, especially in this case, China as well. So then the possible scenario would be, if Taiwan Strait War happens, then the United States asks Japan to let the United States use the military base in Japan to dispatch aircraft and submarines to Taiwan directly from Japan. Then Japanese government would say yes. But if Japanese government said yes at the prior consultation, which is the system, from the agreement between Japan and the United States, we have to have the prior consultation between two countries before the United States send troops from Japan to Taiwan. But if at the prior consultation, Japan said yes, it means, in next day, in 1 day, 2 days, Japan would be retaliated. That is the dilemma Japanese government will face. At a time, do you want to hear the voice of Japanese people, or do you want to hear the voice of the United States? Which do you want to take? At a time, Japan. If Japan is a democratic country, then if the Japanese people would like to stop the United States to use the military base in Japan, the government of Japan have to say no to the United States. But, I don't want to reach the point. I don't want to reach to the point that we see the Taiwan Strait War. Before that, we have to stop the war. So at that time, we have to send something. Don't put a lot of weapons in Taiwan to just, trigger the anger of the Chinese. And so that's not the right thing to do. There are so many things we Japanese can say to the United States. Enjoying great relationship with between two countries, good. Would usually have to say something, something difficult to be listened as well, right? If you have something, you have to say that if you're friends.
That's right. That's right. We're friends. We can talk to each other frankly and honestly, and sometimes that's absolutely necessary, and that's what we're doing here today. So let me thank you so much, Sayo. To close on a positive note, I think that the Japanese I believe that the Japanese Prime Minister and the Chinese Prime Minister exchanged congratulatory notes on the 45th anniversary of the China-Japan Friendship Treaty from 1978. So anyway, there's some good news there. We'll continue our effort. We're so thrilled to have you start our series here, and we'll hope, Sayo, that you will come to Providence and visit us, and please keep coming to the U.S. in general and sharing your brilliant thoughts in Washington and other important places. But thank you for all of the work that you do. It's really so important. So thanks for joining us, folks, and we'll continue with the series with Gui Yongtao in Beijing, who will also talk about China-Japan relations. He'll do that on the 31st of October. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you very, very much.